My name is Hannah, and at 34, I learned that my chair came with conditions. At my parents' 35th anniversary party, my dad pointed me toward the garage and said it was just for extended family. I stood there in the doorway with a tray of deviled eggs I'd spent an hour making, and I watched the word hit the air. Extended. That was me. He said it the way you say a table needs to be moved. No malice. No heat. Just a decision already made. Visual, garage doorway, a folding chair, concrete floor. I'd been the one who drove the rental van to the venue that morning. I'd labeled every cooler with a label maker I brought from home. I'd put fresh flowers in the mason jars my mother ordered me to wash. And my father pointed me toward the garage because the dining room was full. My brother's family had the good seats. My sister-in-law had a centerpiece. I had a folding chair on concrete and a plate of eggs nobody asked for. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I walked into the garage and sat down. That was the thing about me. I always understood. That was the phrase my mother used. You always understand. She'd say it at the door when she asked me to leave my own Christmas stocking in the car because the kids were excited and they'd track the numbers. She'd say it on the phone when she needed me to pick up my brother's dry cleaning because he was too busy to get it himself. She'd say it like it was a blessing, like being agreeable was the same as being loved. Oh. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Visual. Hands carrying deviled eggs, a label maker on a counter. When I was 8, my parents bought my brother a telescope for his birthday. It was the kind with a tripod and a carrying case. I'd asked for one the year before, and my mother said telescopes were for kids who showed interest. When I said I was interested, she smiled and told me I was interested in everything. She said it warmly, like it was a compliment. My brother Marcus pointed it at the moon for 3 nights, then left it in the garage. I used it for 2 years. I kept the lens clean. Now, Kerb, the next how easy. I logged every planet I found in a notebook. When I asked if I could bring it to school for Science Week, my mother said no. She said Marcus might want it back. He never asked for it. Nay, he didn't. He never even knew it was gone. But I always understood. When I was 16, I got a job at a diner 3 blocks from our house. I saved $600 over 10 months. I wanted to take the SAT prep course, the one that cost $480. I brought the brochure to my mother at the kitchen table. She looked at it and nodded. Then she asked if I could give the money to my brother instead, because his car had broken down and he needed a new transmission. She said I was so smart I'd get into college anyway. She said Marcus needed the help more. I gave her the money. I took the SAT without the course. I got a score that was fine. Not great. Fine die. Days, Emily. My brother got the transmission. No, he drove that car for 2 years and never once thanked me. I always understood. Visual. A spiral notebook with planets written in pencil. A diner uniform. That was the ledger they kept. My usefulness was the thing they measured. My worth was the thing they never acknowledged. I was useful because I showed up. I was useful because I didn't complain. I was useful because I could be moved to the garage without a scene. My brother was loved. My brother was celebrated. My brother was in the dining room. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you this because the day I sat in that garage, I finally understood the difference between being useful and being valued. And I understood that I'd been mistaking one for the other for 34 years. The cabin was the first real betrayal. Not the first small one. The first one I couldn't explain away. My grandparents had a lake house up north. It was small, maybe 800 square feet, with a dock that wobbled and a wood stove that smoked if you didn't open the flue just right. I loved that place. When my grandmother died, she left it to my mother and her two sisters. My mother bought out her sisters for $42,000. She said she wanted to keep it in the immediate family. Immediate. Oh, that word again. I was 27 at the time. I'd just gotten my real estate license. I'd been working at a brokerage for 3 years, and I'd saved enough to put down a small payment on my own place. I was renting a studio above a garage, and the landlord had mice. My mother called me and said she had an idea. She said if I managed the cabin, if I handled the bookings and the cleaning and the maintenance, I could stay there for the summer. She said it would be good for me, a change of scenery. I didn't ask for rent. I didn't ask for a share of the bookings. I just said yes. I always said yes. Visual. A lake house with a wobbly dock. A wood stove. For 6 summers I managed that cabin. New. I drove up every weekend from May through September. I scrubbed the toilets. I replaced the shower curtain when it got moldy. I fixed the screen door with a kit from the hardware store. I kept a binder with the names of every renter, their dates, their deposits, their complaints. I kept the refrigerator stocked with bottled water and coffee filters. I mowed the lawn. I weeded the flower beds. I sanded the dock. My mother called it our cabin. She'd say our like we shared it, but what she meant was she owned it, and I kept it running. When I told her I wanted to buy into it, just 10%, just enough to have a stake, she laughed. She said, Hannah, you always understand. This is a family asset. You're part of the family. She said it like I'd already been given something. Like my labor was its own reward. I didn't push. I didn't even ask for a receipt for the cleaning supplies. I just kept going. And yeah, 6 summers, 51 months. The exact number of months I managed a property I would never own. 51 months I paid for gas, for paint, for new locks, for the internet bill I set up in my name because my mother said she didn't know how to do it online. 51 months, I answered calls at 10 p.m. from renters who'd lost the key or couldn't find the breaker box. I did it because I thought if I was useful enough, they'd finally see me. They'd finally understand that I wasn't just the person who got moved to the garage. I was the person who kept the whole thing running. Visual. A binder with rental records. A screen door being replaced. But that's not how families like mine work. You don't earn visibility by being invisible. You earn invisibility by being good at it. None. The mechanism was boring. That's the part I want you to understand. It wasn't a dramatic discovery. It wasn't a secret dossier or a hidden will. It was a clause in a property tax document that nobody in my family had read because nobody in my family believed they had to. My mother set up the cabin as a family trust in 2014. She named herself as the trustee, with my brother as the successor. I wasn't mentioned. I'm not surprised. I'm just telling you what the papers said. But when she set up the trust, she also signed a document called the Management and Maintenance Designation. It was a separate filing, something her lawyer had recommended to keep the trust's tax status clean. The designation named me as the sole authorized operator of the property. It specified that any changes to the property's operations, including transfer of management rights or sale, required my written consent. My mother never read it. She signed it because her lawyer told her to, and she didn't ask questions. She was not someone who asked questions. She was someone who made decisions and expected everyone else to fall in line. I read because I was the one who kept the folder with all the cabin documents in my filing cabinet. I was the one who'd taken the time to organize the paperwork, because if I didn't, nobody else would. Visual, a filing cabinet, a legal document with a signature line. I didn't know what I had when I first read it. It took me 3 days to realize. I was going through the folder to find the original deed for a renter who'd asked about property lines, and I saw the designation on the second-to-last page. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time. The language was dry, administrative, and nauseating. The kind of thing a lawyer writes so another lawyer can argue about it later. But what it meant was this. My mother couldn't sell the cabin without my signature. She couldn't transfer it to my brother without my signature. She couldn't even change the booking software without my consent. I was the only one who could authorize any change to how the property operated. I didn't tell anyone. I put the document back in the folder and closed the cabinet. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with it. But I knew, for the first time in my life, that I had something my family needed, something they couldn't take from me. The wedding was the breaking point. Dad, did you see you? Not my wedding, my brother's. Marcus had proposed to his girlfriend in Paris. She'd said yes. My mother had spent 6 months planning a reception at a vineyard, an hour from our house. She'd invited 240 people. She'd hired a caterer and a florist and a string quartet. She'd spent $38,000, which she'd told me proudly, like it was a number I was supposed to admire. I wasn't helping with the wedding. I wasn't asked. I was asked to coordinate the cabin rentals that same weekend because my brother wanted to use the property for his groomsmen. I said yes. I always said yes. I blocked off the dates. I turned away 3 paying renters who'd already inquired about that weekend. I drove up to the cabin on the Thursday before the wedding and spent 4 hours cleaning. I made the beds. I put fresh towels in the bathroom. I opened the windows to air it out. I left a basket with granola bars and bottled water on the counter, the same basket I'd left for every renter for 6 summers. Then I drove back to my apartment and went to sleep. I had to be at the vineyard at 7 the next morning to help set up the tables. Visual. A cabin with fresh towels and a welcome basket. A vineyard at dawn. I got to the vineyard at 6:50. My mother was already there, directing the caterers. She saw me and waved me over. She told me to take the centerpieces into the tent and unwrap them. She told me to check the place settings and make sure the forks were on the left. She told me to keep an eye on the bar setup because the bartender was new and she didn't trust him. I did all of it. I moved quickly. I didn't complain. My brother's fiancée, Rachel, arrived at 9. She looked beautiful. She looked happy. She looked at me like I was part of the scenery. I was the one who'd set up the gift table. I was the one who'd put the welcome sign on the easel. I was the one who'd filled the vases with water and trimmed the stems of the flowers. But I was also the one who got moved to the garage. I always understood. The ceremony was at 11. I sat in the back row. I watched my brother say his vows. I watched my mother cry. I watched my father shake hands with the groomsmen. Oh, and I felt, for the first time in 34 years, that I was watching something I wasn't part of. Not because I'd been excluded. I'd been excluded my whole life. But because I could finally see the pattern. I could finally see the shape of it. Virgil, a back row seat at a wedding, a bride and groom at an altar. After the ceremony, my mother pulled me aside. She said she needed me to go to the cabin and check on the groomsmen. She said they'd been drinking, and she wanted to make sure everything was okay. She said, "You always understand, Hannah. You're the one I can count on." That was the first time she used it that day. You always understand. She said it like I'd been chosen. Like being chosen to check on drunk groomsmen at a property I'd already cleaned twice with some kind of honor. I drove to the cabin. The groomsmen were fine. They were in the living room, playing poker with the stereo on. They asked if I was the cleaning lady. I said yes. I always said yes. Man. The second time my mother said was at the reception, after the toasts. I was standing by the bar. I wasn't drinking. I was holding a glass of water and watching the guests dance. My mother came up to me and said she needed my credit card. No, he said the florist had shown up with an extra charge, and she couldn't find her wallet. I asked how much. She said, $840. She said, "You always understand, Hannah. This is a family day. I'll pay you back next week." She never paid me back. I'm not surprised. I'm just telling you what happened. I gave her the card. I'd given her my card before. 6 years earlier, I'd given her my card to pay for the cabin's new furnace. And she'd said she'd pay me back in a month. She never did. That was a $4,000 charge. I paid it off over 18 months. I always understood. Visual. A bar at a wedding. A hand holding a credit card. The third time she said it was at the end of the night. The reception was winding down. The guests were leaving. My mother was standing by the exit, thanking people as they walked out. I was carrying boxes of leftover centerpieces to my car. I'd been asked to take them home because my mother didn't want to deal with them. She saw me walking past with an armful of vases, and she said, "You always understand, Hannah. You're the only one who knows how to keep things together." I didn't answer. I just kept walking. I put the centerpieces in my trunk. I drove home. I went to bed. And I thought about the document in my filing cabinet. I thought about the clause. I thought about the $38,000 wedding and the 6 summers I'd managed a cabin I would never own, and the 10 months I'd worked at a diner so my brother could have a transmission. I thought about all of it, and I realized I was done understanding. Oh, Asia. I triggered the mechanism alone, in my apartment on a Monday morning in October. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't write a dramatic letter. I sent one email. It was addressed to the county property assessor with a copy to the trust's administrative contact. The email was short. It said that, as the sole authorized operator of the property, I would not be renewing the trust's management designation for the coming year. It said that the property could no longer be used as a rental or a family asset without my written consent. It said I was exercising my right to terminate the designation, effective 30 days from the date of the email. Visual: an email window, a cursor over the send button. I sent it at 9:14 a.m. Then I went to work. I had a showing at 11. I showed a condo to a young couple who wanted to negotiate on the price. I was professional. I was calm. I was the same Hannah I'd always been. Except I wasn't. I had done something my family couldn't undo. I had taken the one thing they'd depended on, and I'd quietly removed myself from it. The property wouldn't be available for rentals anymore. It wouldn't be available for family gatherings. It wouldn't be available for anything because I was the only one who'd ever made it available in the first place. My mother didn't find out for 3 weeks. She'd scheduled a Thanksgiving weekend at the cabin with my brother and his new wife and my father and a group of her friends from the country club. She'd already sent the invitations. She'd already told everyone it was going to be a wonderful weekend. Then she got the letter from the county assessor's office informing her that the rental permit had been suspended due to a lapse in management authorization. She called me at work. She was frantic. She couldn't understand what had happened. She said the county made a mistake. You need to fix this, Hannah. You always understand how to fix these things. I told her I'd take a look at it. I didn't tell her I'd caused it. I went home that night, and I looked at my filing cabinet. I looked at the folder with the cabin documents. I looked at the Management and Maintenance Designation, the one I'd filed away years ago and never mentioned again, and I realized I was already a stranger to my family. I was just making it official. The Thanksgiving weekend was the event, the one where everything collapsed. My mother had decided to hold the dinner at the cabin anyway. She'd called the county and argued with them for an hour, and they told her the permit could be reinstated if I signed a new designation. She called me and asked me to sign it. She said, "Hannah, you always understand. Just sign the paper. It's just a formality." I said I'd think about it. She didn't like that. She said she needed an answer. She said her friends were coming, and she'd already bought the turkey, and she couldn't just cancel now. She said, "This is important, Hannah. The family needs this." I said I'd think about it. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I said I'd think about it. Visual: a phone on a kitchen counter. A woman standing alone. She showed up at my apartment the next morning. And she was wearing her good coat. She had a folder with the county's letter and the blank designation form. She sat at my table and she told me I was being difficult. Not difficult. She said I'd never been difficult before. She said, "You always understand, Hannah. Why are you making this so hard?" That was the 3rd time. I counted. I said I'll come to the cabin for Thanksgiving. I said I'll bring a salad. I said we can talk about it then. She didn't like that either, but she left. She left the folder on my table. She left the blank form. I looked at the form. I looked at the signature line. I looked at my name, already typed in the space above it. I hadn't typed it. I'd never typed it. My mother had typed it for me. She'd typed my name on a legal document she expected me to sign, and she hadn't even asked first. No. I drove up to the cabin on Thanksgiving morning. No, I brought a salad. I also brought a printed copy of the Management and Maintenance Designation, with the clause highlighted. I brought a printed copy of the county's confirmation of my termination email. I brought a printed copy of my bank records from the 6 summers I'd managed the property, showing the expenses I'd paid out of pocket. Visual: a stack of printed documents on a car seat, a salad bowl. The cabin was crowded when I arrived. There were 10 people inside. My mother, my father, my brother, his wife, my mother's 3 friends from the country club, and their husbands. They were drinking wine in the living room. They were laughing. They didn't notice me come in. I put my salad on the counter. I put the printed documents on the dining table. I waited. An hour later, my mother pulled me into the kitchen. She closed the door. She said, "You're going to sign that form, Hannah. You're going to sign it before dinner, because I need the permit reinstated by Monday. This is not a discussion." I said no. Hi. She didn't hear it. She kept talking. She said, "Your brother has a business meeting next week, and he wants to bring his clients up here. He needs the cabin to be available. The family needs the cabin to be available." I said, "I know." No. She said, "Then sign the form. You always understand. Why are you being like this?" That was the 4th time. You always understand. I reached into my bag and pulled out the printed documents. I put them on the kitchen counter. I said I signed a document 6 years ago, and you signed one too. The one you signed is the Management and Maintenance Designation. It gives me the sole authority to authorize any changes to how this property operates. I terminated that authority 3 weeks ago. I said I can't sign the new form because I no longer hold the designation. I'm not the authorized operator anymore. I'm not anything. She stared at me. She said, "That's not legal." I said, "It's in the filing." She said, "You can't do that. This is the family cabin. I own it." I said, "You do own it, but you can't run it. Not without me." I pointed to the printed document. I pointed to the highlighted clause. I said, "The county knows. They confirmed it in writing. I have the email." Visual: a highlighted clause on a legal document. A kitchen counter with printed papers. She picked up the documents. She read them. Now, why aren't it? Her face changed. She turned to my father, who was standing in the doorway. She said, "Did you know about this?" He shook his head. He said he didn't even know there was a designation. He said he'd never read the papers. My mother looked at me. She looked at the documents. Oh. She looked at the room full of people who were waiting for their Thanksgiving dinner. She said, "You're punishing the whole family for a misunderstanding. You're ruining Thanksgiving because of a filing mistake." I said, "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just not doing your work anymore. I've been doing it for 6 years. 51 months. Manhood. I've paid for the furnace, the internet, the repairs, the cleaning supplies. I've turned away paying renters so your son could use the property for his groomsmen. I've managed this cabin like it was mine, and you've never once treated me like it was. I said I'm not going to sign a document that gives you a Thanksgiving weekend. You can have the Thanksgiving. I'll take the silence. The outside witness was a woman named Karen Delaney. She was one of my mother's country club friends. Oh, she was also the vice president of a real estate development firm that my brokerage had been trying to partner with for 2 years. She'd been in the living room during the whole conversation. She'd heard everything. When I came out of the kitchen, she was standing by the dining table. She had a glass of wine in her hand. She was looking at the printed documents I'd left on the counter. She said, "You're the one who managed this property." I said, "Yes." She said, "For how long?" I said, 6 summers, 51 months. She nodded. She said, "I read the designation. You're the only one with operational authority. That's a very specific legal setup. It's not a mistake." She turned to my mother. She said, "Your daughter is telling the truth. Now, if she doesn't sign the new form, the property can't be used as a rental. The county won't reinstate the permit without her authorization." No. My mother looked at her. She looked at me. She looked like she'd been slapped. Karen Delaney wasn't just a friend. She was a person my mother had been trying to impress for years. She was someone who'd always been polite to me, but who'd never really seen me. Now she was seeing me. She was seeing the documents. She was seeing the facts. Visual. A woman in a country club dress reading a document. A dining table with turkey and centerpieces. Karen said, "Hannah, if you're ever looking for a new role, my firm is hiring property managers. We need people who understand the paperwork side of things." She said it quietly. "Not for the room. For me." I said, "I'll think about it." She smiled. She said, "You should." Then she walked back to the living room. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. The validation was already done. The withheld labor started that night. I drove home from the cabin at 6. I didn't stay for dinner. I didn't eat my salad. I left it on the counter. I left the printed documents on the table. I left my mother standing in the kitchen with her good coat and her blank form and her Thanksgiving turkey. I went home and I took a shower. I made a cup of tea. I sat on my couch and I turned my phone to silent. Visual, a couch, a cup of tea, a phone face down on a table. The consequences didn't take long. The cabin's rental calendar had been managed through an online system that I'd set up in my name. When I terminated the designation, the system suspended the account. My mother couldn't log in. She couldn't access the existing bookings. She couldn't refund the deposits. The groomsmen who'd stayed at the cabin for my brother's wedding had left a mess. They'd broken a lamp. They'd left pizza boxes in the yard. They'd used all the towels and left them in a heap in the corner. I was the one who usually dealt with that. I was the one who'd drive up the next weekend and clean it all up, and I'd never be thanked. This time nobody drove up. The mess sat there for a month. The heat was turned off because I was the one who paid the bill, and I'd stopped paying it. The pipes froze. The wood stove was left open, and the soot stained the carpet. My mother called my brother and told him to fix it. He said he was too busy. He said it wasn't his cabin. He said he hadn't asked for the groomsmen to be there. My mother called my father and told him to take care of it. He said he didn't know how to fix a furnace. He said he'd never cleaned a property in his life. My mother called me 13 times. I answered once. She said, "Hannah, you have to come help. The cabin is ruined. The pipes are frozen. The heat is off. We don't know what to do." I said, "I understand, May." She said, "You always understand. That's why we need you. You know how to fix this." I said, "I don't fix things anymore." I hung up. I turned my phone back to silent. Now, nay, as sudden. The fallout was a slow burn, not an explosion. My brother called me 3 days later. He said, my mother was hysterical. He said the country club friends were spreading the story. No, he said, Karen Delaney had told everyone that I was the person who'd kept the cabin running, and that my mother had no idea how to manage a property on her own. He said, my mother had lost standing. He said she wasn't coming to Christmas. No, he said she was too embarrassed. He said, you always understand, Hannah. You know how she is. She didn't mean to hurt you. She just didn't think about it. That was the first time he'd used the phrase. It sounded different in his voice. It sounded like an excuse. It sounded like he'd been saying it his whole life. I said, she's been not thinking about it for 34 years. I'm not going to make it 35. I said, if you want to help her, you can drive up to the cabin and fix the furnace. You can find a plumber. You can call the county and figure out the permit situation. I said you can do all the things I used to do. You just never did them because you didn't have to. No, not kind. He didn't have an answer. He hung up. He didn't call again. Visual. A phone on a table. A woman looking out a window. My father called a week later. He said he wanted to talk. He said he'd never realized I'd been doing so much. He said he hadn't known about the designation. He said he hadn't known about the furnace payment. He said I should have paid more attention. He said I was just going along with your mother. I thought she knew what she was doing. I didn't realize she was leaning on you so hard. Oh. There was a flicker there. A real one. Not an apology, but a flicker of self-awareness. I said, I'm not coming back to the cabin. I said I'm not signing the new form. I'm not going to keep being the person who makes things work for everyone else. I said, I'm done understanding. He said, I understand. He said, I'm sorry. I didn't say it back. I just said I know. Then I hung up. Ah, Nanny. The cabin sold in the spring. My mother couldn't afford to keep it. She'd been using the rental income to cover the property taxes and the insurance. Without it, the costs were too high. She put it on the market for $150,000. It sold for $132,000. I heard about it from Karen Delaney, who'd heard about it from one of the country club friends. Karen called me and said she'd put in a good word for me at her firm. She said they had an opening for a property manager. She said the pay was good. Now, she said I could start whenever I wanted. I didn't take the job. I had my own brokerage by then. I'd started it with the money I'd saved from working the extra shifts and not paying for the cabin's expenses anymore. It was small. It was mine. Visual. A small office with a sign on the door. A woman at a desk with paperwork. The silent phone became my favorite part of my new life. For the first time in my memory, my phone wasn't buzzing with demands. It wasn't lighting up with my mother's voice. It wasn't full of texts about cancellations, about cleaning schedules, about which renter had lost a key. My mother called once more in April. She said she wanted to talk. She said she didn't understand why I'd done what I did. She said, "You always understood, Hannah. That was who you were. That was what made you special." I said, "I don't think it made me special. I think it made me invisible." She was quiet. I waited. She said, "I didn't see it that way." I said, "I know you didn't." I didn't ask her to see it differently. I didn't ask for an apology. I just let the silence sit. Then I told her I had to go. I had a showing. Yandere. Nana Sion. I think about that Thanksgiving sometimes. I think about the garage. I think about the telescope and the diner and the 6 summers of cleaning a cabin I'd never owned. I don't think about it with sadness. I think about it like a ledger I finally balanced. Visual, a garage door, a folding chair, an empty driveway. My brother's wife asked me to coffee last month. She said she'd been thinking about me. She said my brother never talked about the cabin, and she didn't know why. She said she'd heard the story from Karen Delaney, and she wanted to hear my side. I told her my side. I told her about the 51 months. I told her about the telescope. I told her about the diner. I told her about the form. She listened. She said I didn't know any of that. She said, "I don't think my husband knows either. I don't think he ever really looked at you." She said, "I'm sorry, Hannah." It wasn't an apology for what her family had done. It was an acknowledgement. It was enough. I saw her again last week at a little cafe near my office. She was alone. She said she'd been thinking about me again. Oh, and let me see.